The E2, one of the most mediocre tank engines ever made, and yet one of my favourites based on looks alone. I love the proportions of these, they just look right. There is a feast for the eyes just because everything just sort of looks right. This here is a Wills kit version of it. I have a Hornby one right over here, and yeah, I love them. They just look right. They just so enjoyable to look at. But in real life, 10 of these were built starting around 1911 to 1916. 10 members of the class were built. They changed hands a couple of times from the LBSC to Southern and then finally to British Rail. They were quite mediocre. They were originally built for short distance goods trains along with shunting duties. However, because of the size of the water tanks, it was actually found out that they were a bit naffed. So they were mostly relegated to shunting duties. However, were tried out on push-pull services, but due to how they were balanced, they roved a little too rough to actually be used on it. So they got put back to shunting duties. The first 5 members of the class had these short side tanks. The later 5 had these larger, longer ones, just for a little extra water capacity, because they really were desperate with these. Once BR got their hands on them, they sent 2 up to Southampton docks, and those 2 would be the last 2 to be withdrawn. Withdrawal started around 1961 and concluded by 63. No members of the class survived into preservation. For ready to run models of the E2, you had 2 choices. You had the Trix HO version and the Hornby version, which came out much later. These were first released in 1978, I believe, and wrapped up by 85. The sole reason for them wrapping up by 1985 was because of the Hornby Thomas range. They needed a tooling to turn into Thomas, and they had the E2. It was the right basis, so they thought, fuck it. Ironically, these have actually come back into the Hornby Railroad range, but as the Thomas guys in a different livery. They often get chucked into TAT, like the Beatles train set or the SECR green version. Just waiting for the day they do an LBSC livery. For kit built models, you have the Wills version. I think this is an absolute monster of a kit. It weighs a ton and I love it. It's pure white metal and it's just right. There's nothing to really complain about this. This chassis is the most reliable Triang chassis I have, because this just uses a Triang chassis with different wheels and different side rods. It is so reliable that on open days when I'm doing shunting, I will use this, my J50 from the last video, or a Bachmann pannier tank. Let that sink in. This is so reliable that it confidently gives my J50, a modern tank engine, a run for its money. An engine that has a 5-pole motor and a flywheel. This is just a Triang chassis with different wheels and side rods, and it confidently gives it a run for its money. It outdoes my Bachmann pannier half the time. That's how good and reliable this is. That is staggering. I can't get over how reliable this is. And it's just a generic Triang chassis. I don't know what the last owner's done to it, but what have they done? I want them to do it to the rest of my fleet. There are a few visual differences between the two. The main one being slight differences to the proportions, mainly the bunkers. The Wills one has a much larger version, slightly taller tanks, and I think they're also slightly longer. There's different details between the two. The Hornby one has underframe detailing with all the brakes and sandboxes. This is just smooth. This pump's missing here, but there's extra handrails on either side to make up for it. I think the buffer beams on here are much worse compared to the Hornby version because the buffer heads sink in instead of standing out. The handrails are much finer on this one. You can't see the screw here. There's no cab detail in here, but there's cab doors. You have cab details, but you have to pick them out yourself. You have lamp iron brackets on the back. None here, it's just smooth. Handrails for the cab doors here. They both got safety valves, but they look very different in the way they've been done. The wheels one's much fatter on the bottom compared to the Hornby one, which is pretty slim the entire way. You got these weird sticky uppy bits that I don't know what for. They're not present here. But all things considered, it's more of a preference thing. Do you like the Wills one or do you like the Hornby one? Personally, I love both. They're just both amazing tank engines with their own strengths. Mainly weight for this guy, but they both have their own respective strengths, and that's what I love about them. The way the chassis come off on these are vastly different. On the Hornby ones, it's just slide the chassis back and then down. And there you go. There's your chassis. On the Wills one, you have to get your screw out. And then pull up on the chassis. And there you go. They're really similar. The main thing is the Hornby motor has just been shunted forwards further just for cab details to be put in. These motors are near enough identical. The only real difference between the XO3 and the XO4 is realistically this has an extra bearing on the back and a plastic worm drive instead of a brass worm gear. Prior to me getting this Wills kit, the Hornby one was my test engine. I tested it on everything. New track, I used this. I needed to check that points were working, I used this. This was my most reliable engine up until last year. And the whole reason it lost out to that title wasn't because it became unreliable. It's just that I started getting more and more modern stuff. This isn't a bad model. It's just old. Weather it up and add a couple of extra details of your own, and they really can give newer models a run for their money. Not necessarily in performance, but in looks alone. You have to remember these were also used for goods trains for a short while. And even though they were mostly used for shunting afterwards, they still occasionally got used on goods work. So, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have them shunters. So that doesn't necessarily mean you have to have them as shunters. You can have them running goods trains, which means you can get away with not having 100% reliable track. One of the funny things about these models is I've owned this guy for years. I got this last year at a train show. I never paid the number any of attention. I picked it up, I looked at it and thought, I want this, only to get home and realised I already had 104. But now I have it in early 7 and wartime black, so that's fun. So how about we see some of these guys run? So the E2s, what are my final thoughts about them? Well, it should be pretty obvious. I love them. They're mediocre tank engines at best, but I love them for their looks. The models of them are amazing, and I really can't recommend them enough. I know these videos I do are quite short and don't really give you a full understanding of them. It's literally just what comes to my mind, I just blew it out. But I love them. I really love them. They're such important engines to me because of how much I love them. Would I recommend getting a model of an E2? Yes, but there is a big catch to it. It depends on the price. There's people trying to sell these for silly money. You know, I see them going for 60, 70 quid. They're not worth that. They're nowhere near worth that. I think they're amazing, but they're not that amazing. But the Hornby E2, I highly recommend it. If you see one for a good price, I recommend you grab it. They're brilliant little tank engines, and I love them. The Wills E2, I love it. It weighs an absolute ton. Seriously, that J50 in the last video where I said, oh yeah, people are stunned by how much those weighed. This weighs more. This weighs quite a bit more. Just to drive home my point of how much I love these. I have 6 E2s at the moment. I've had at least 3 others, which have now been turned into Spears engines. So, you know, I might have a small addiction. But who cares, because they're E2s and look at them, they're so cool and awesome! So that wraps up this week's video. I hope you listened to me ranting about the Hornby E2 and the Wills E2. It's a little freak compared to the others, but I still love it. I upload every Saturday. If you enjoyed what you saw, well, feel free to come back next week. That's all I got for you. Bye bye now.